One thing that people forget about our history is that Reconstruction after the Civil War was actually working. There were over 2,000 black elected officials in America. Businesses that blacks were starting to take hold. And in 1877, I think it was Grover, I can't remember the president, but he got elected and basically said, "I'm withdrawing the troops." In 1876, there were 125,000 black registered voters in Louisiana. In 1878, that number dropped to 5,000. And if you're wondering about the flag, it had essentially been dead and buried until 1948, when Strom Thurmond brought it back with the Dixiecrat Party. And once again, they are telling us as clearly as they can what they are about and why they're waving that flag. The party's purpose was clear: we stand for segregation of the races. This is from the editor of the Augusta, Georgia Courier in 1951. Folks, they are saying it as plainly as they can. And yet, we are still having a debate in this country about what this stuff means. So Brown versus the board in 54, and we all, those of us of a certain age anyway, remember some of these images. And I told you about Thurgood Marshall's argument to the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, when we think about the legacy of white supremacy, we recognize that public schools in America are more segregated today than they were in 1954. That's not by mistake. That's not by accident. Understand that this is now 89 years after the Civil War. And this is the first time that the law in America, I'm not talking about the society and the social acceptance, but 89 years after the Civil War, it is the first time that the law in America says black folks are human enough that they can sit in the same classroom with us. What does that tell you about how deeply ingrained white supremacy has been in America? And now we have this. And it's funny, except it's not. Our history is being stolen from us. Historical black universities and colleges, pioneers of school choice. Living proof that when more options are provided to students, they are afforded greater access and greater quality. And now the president is saying we're going to have to stop federal funding to these schools because that would be racist. I want to laugh when I read this, but what I remember is this is the tactic that was used by the South to rewrite history about what the Civil War meant. The reason they are doing it now is because it has worked in the past, and it will continue to work unless we're going to do something about it. So this is going to be a disturbing image. That's the image that his mother made sure showed up on newspapers around America in 1955 or 56. And there are many people that will say that that picture, that image, was one of the major sparks of the civil rights movement. And what I believe about that picture is that America, mostly white America, had a naked lunch moment with race. It didn't last long, but there was a naked lunch moment where they looked at this picture and said essentially something like this: I know those colored people are causing problems, but I didn't sign up for this. This is a document that was published in Montgomery, Alabama, after the Montgomery bus boycott. This document was prepared by the Montgomery Improvement Association, and it was sent out in the black community the night before, the Sunday night before the buses were going to be desegregated on Monday morning. This is a victory document. We have won this struggle. And I just want you to see how many black Americans understand that there is a difference between the law and living. The bus driver is in charge of the bus and has been instructed to obey the law. Assume that he will cooperate in helping you occupy any vacant seat. Do not deliberately sit by a white person unless there is no other seat. In case of an incident, talk as little as possible, always in a quiet tone, because you know what will happen if you piss off the white folks. Don't get up from your seat. If another person is being molested, do not arise to go to his defense, but pray for the oppressor and use moral and spiritual force to carry on the struggle for justice. And whatever you may think about this advice is coming from people who were living then. And what they understood is, yeah, the law says I can do this, but if I get hauled off that bus, the law is a long way between the bus and the jail overnight and the courthouse the next morning. And there are all kinds of things that can happen between getting arrested and maybe showing up in court. And this is the one that breaks my heart. If you feel you cannot take it, just walk for another week or two. This is the victory document after the Montgomery bus boycott. It is showing you that despite a change in the law, we recognized that white supremacy hadn't gone anywhere. These are law-abiding, God-fearing, good Americans who are saying, we are not bigots. We are not racist. We just don't want the black people in our communities. So that happened in 1963. And remember, I am going through this to try and show you the events that were happening at the same time that this second explosion of monuments in the South to Confederate heroes was being built. And then this happened in 63. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, and just a few weeks later, the Confederate flag was flying over the University of Alabama. And in September of 1963, these 4 girls got blown up in this church. This was the young girl that survived. And if you want to see the faces of people who have directly experienced terrorism, you don't have to go to the 9/11 photographs. You don't have to go to the first World Trade Center bombing. You don't have to go to Oklahoma City. These are the faces of people watching the bodies being taken out of the church. And these faces know what terrorism is. You remember Ronald Reagan's campaign advisor? When Ronald Reagan was nominated for President of the United States, the first campaign speech that he made was in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And it was about states' rights. And I guarantee you, the people in Philadelphia and Mississippi knew exactly what he was talking about. And then that's my hometown on April 4th. And I'd just like you to consider this. This is Dr. King in 1955. We must love our enemies, be good to them. This is what we must live by, and we must meet hate with love. We must love our white brothers no matter what they do to us. This is Dr. King in 1967. Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections. The rioters are not seeking to seize territory or attain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. Most of all, alienate it from society, and knowing society cherishes property above people, the rioters are shocking it by abusing property rights. That's not a speech that is brought out in Martin Luther King Week either. And on the night he was killed, April 4th, 1968, he was writing a sermon that was found in the briefcase in his room at the Lorraine Motel. And this is the title of the sermon he was going to give 3 days later. This is what was happening as the second explosion of Confederate monuments was happening in America. So, since we're live streaming, you're not supposed to play copyrighted music. I don't know if y'all remember the Traveling Wilburys. Great, great band. And one of their songs had this verse, and the walls came down all the way to hell, and I saw them when they're standing, and I saw them when they fell. Well, we have seen these monuments stand for way too long. And as I said, taking these monuments down will not feed a hungry person. It will not release anybody from jail. It will not solve the problems of race. But it is one way that we can at least begin to say we are going to deal honestly with what our past is, so that we at least have a fighting chance to move forward in a way that actually makes words like justice and equality mean something instead of sounding like a soundbite that makes us feel good. I want to give you one last example. This is the website, the memorial, the website for the Robert E. Lee Memorial, 2 days before Charlottesville, Virginia. This is the website 2 days after Charlottesville. This is not a true reckoning of our history. This is simply a continued attempt to water down the truth about Robert E. Lee. And I say this once again, I know he has living descendants, and I am not saying this to offend them, and I apologize if this causes pain to them. But Robert E. Lee made his choices. And as W.E.B. Du Bois said, he's got to live with them. And those choices were strength and physical valor, but moral cowardice. So, some of these statues are coming down. They're being removed in the dark of night because the city officials don't want to remove them in the day because there might be disputes, there might be violence, there might be fighting. My only point is this. There is a movement in America that has not been in existence in my lifetime. I was 11 years old in Memphis when King was shot and killed. And I was young, but I was old enough to know enough. And I knew what was happening then. I heard the discussions that were going on in the civil rights movement because they weren't discussions in a history book. These were discussions that were going on when my mother and father walked out the door in the morning. My father was an educator, my mother a homemaker, and they were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. And what I'm telling you is the discussions about racial equality that were going on then are nowhere near as deep, as intense, and as revealing as the discussions that are going on today. As scared as I feel and as frustrated as I feel with what's going on in this country,